Have you ever tried to think without using words? It's almost impossible, right? Our thoughts are so deeply intertwined with language. But what about our early ancestors who lived hundreds of thousands of years ago, before complex spoken language even existed? How did they think? Did they even have an inner world like we do? This is one of the most fascinating mysteries of human evolution. Today, we're diving deep into the prehistoric mind to explore how our ancestors navigated their world, solved problems, and even created art, all without the sophisticated language we rely on. So, how do you even begin to study a mind that left no written records, no audio recordings, just silent bones and stones? Well, the clues are all around us, hidden in the very artifacts they left behind. These ancient objects are like fossilized thoughts, giving us a glimpse into their cognitive abilities. We're talking about much more than just rocks. We're talking about tools, art, and even the layout of their living spaces. These are the puzzle pieces we use to reconstruct the thought processes of a pre-linguistic human. Let's start with the most basic evidence: stone tools. Take the Acheulean hand axe, a tool that remained remarkably consistent for over 1,000,000 years. Making one of these isn't simple. You can't just smash two rocks together and hope for the best. It requires a specific set of steps, a mental template. The toolmaker had to select the right kind of rock, understand its flaking properties, and then carefully strike it in a precise sequence to achieve that symmetrical, teardrop shape. This process reveals a few key cognitive skills. First, there's planning and foresight. They had to visualize the final product within the raw stone. They had to think ahead, planning each strike to set up the next one. This is what psychologists call procedural memory, a kind of how-to knowledge stored in the brain. Think about how you tie your shoes or ride a bike. You don't consciously talk yourself through it. Your body just knows the steps. Our ancestors likely had an incredibly powerful procedural memory for toolmaking. It was a physical, intuitive knowledge passed down through observation and imitation, not through verbal instruction. This points to a mind that was highly visual and spatial. Instead of an inner monologue saying, "Okay, now I need to hit this part at a 45-degree angle," their thinking might have been more like a mental movie or a 3D model they could rotate and manipulate in their minds. They could see the finished axe inside the stone, and their hands knew the path to get there. This powerful visual spatial intelligence would have been crucial not just for making tools, but for everything they did. Imagine navigating a vast, unmarked landscape. Without language to describe landmarks like the tall tree by the crooked river, they would have relied on a detailed mental map. They would remember the shape of a distant mountain, the feel of the ground under their feet, the position of the sun at different times of day. Their memory would have been an incredibly rich tapestry of sensory information, sights, sounds, all interconnected to form a deep understanding of their environment. They weren't just surviving. They were thriving thanks to a powerful, nonverbal intelligence. But what about more abstract thought? Did they have emotions? Did they form social bonds? The evidence for this is a bit more subtle, but it's there. The organization of their campsites, for example, suggests social planning. Archaeologists have found distinct areas for different activities toolmaking here, butchering an animal there, and a hearth for gathering over there. This spatial planning implies an understanding of social order and cooperation. They had to coordinate their actions as a group, and that requires a shared understanding. The theory of mind, the ability to recognize that others have their own thoughts, feelings, and intentions. They might not have had words like love, sadness, or anger, but they certainly experienced these emotions. We can infer this from how they treated their dead. Some of the earliest burial sites show incredible care. Bodies were placed in specific positions, sometimes with objects like tools or animal horns. This isn't just about disposing of a body. It's a ritual. It suggests grief, respect, and perhaps even a nascent belief in an afterlife. These actions are emotional expressions, thoughts made visible. An individual might have felt a profound sense of loss, a nonverbal ache in their chest, and expressed it by carefully arranging the body of a loved one. This is emotion, raw and unfiltered by language. And then, around 40,000 years ago, something incredible happens: the creative explosion. Suddenly, we see a profusion of cave paintings, intricate carvings, and personal ornaments. This is where the prehistoric mind truly comes alive for us. Think about the stunning cave paintings in Lascaux or Chauvet. These aren't just crude doodles. They are masterful works of art, showing a deep understanding of animal anatomy, movement, and perspective. The artists used the natural contours of the cave walls to create a three-dimensional effect, making the animals seem to leap out of the rock. To create this art, the artist had to hold a vivid image in their mind, often in complete darkness, and then project it onto the cave wall using charcoal and pigments. This is a massive cognitive leap. It's one thing to visualize a tool you're holding, but it's another to recall a herd of bison you saw days ago and recreate it from memory. This demonstrates powerful episodic memory, the ability to remember specific past events. But it's more than just memory. It's imagination. It's the ability to create something that isn't physically present. These artworks might have been part of shamanic rituals, a way to connect with the spirit world. They could have been hunting magic, meant to ensure a successful hunt. Or maybe they were simply stories, a way of recording important events for the community. A painting of a hunt could communicate the entire narrative, the animals we pursued, the danger we faced, the triumph of the kill. Without words, these visual stories would have been the primary way of transmitting culture, knowledge, and collective memory from one generation to the next. So what was the internal experience of these minds actually like? This is the ultimate mystery. Without language to structure our thoughts into neat, linear sentences, their consciousness might have been a more holistic, sensory-rich stream of awareness. Imagine a flow of images, emotions, and intentions, all blending together. A flash of a memory of a lion, a feeling of fear, an urge to climb a tree, a mental image of a safe refuge, all happening simultaneously, not as a step-by-step internal dialogue. Some scientists speculate that their thinking was more metaphorical and associative. The shape of a cloud might trigger the image of a bison, which in turn might evoke the feeling of hunger and the intention to hunt. Their world was one of connections and patterns, perceived directly without the need for linguistic labels. Their intuition would have been their primary guide, a powerful, gut-level understanding of the world honed by millions of years of evolution. The development of language, when it finally arrived, was undoubtedly a revolution. It allowed for more complex planning, more efficient knowledge transfer, and the birth of abstract concepts like justice, time, and identity. It gave us the inner monologue that fills our heads today. But in gaining language, we may have lost some of that intense, sensory-rich, intuitive connection to the world that our ancestors possessed. The minds of our prehistoric ancestors were not empty or primitive. They were complex, creative, and profoundly intelligent. They thought in pictures, in feelings, in actions, and in connections. By studying the echoes of their thoughts left in stone and ochre, we not only learn about them, but we also gain a deeper appreciation for the incredible diversity of human cognition and the many different ways there are to be intelligent. The next time you find yourself lost in thought, take a moment to silence the words and just see, feel, and remember. You might just get a fleeting glimpse into the world of a mind before language. Have you ever wondered what the first spark of belief looked like in the human mind? What was the first truly abstract idea that set us apart from every other creature on Earth? Today, we're digging deep into the past tens of thousands of years ago to explore one of the most profound human behaviors, burying the dead. This isn't just about putting a body in the ground. It's about the moment our ancestors started to grapple with life, death, and the very concept of a world beyond what they could see. Let's travel back in time to the era of Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. For millions of years, when an early hominid died, that was it. Their body was left to the elements, to scavengers, just like any other animal. But then something changed. Around 100,000 years ago, we find the first evidence of intentional burials. At sites like the Skull and Khafre caves in modern-day Israel, archaeologists uncovered skeletons of Homo sapiens laid to rest in carefully dug graves. One individual was found buried with the jawbone of a wild boar. Another was curled in a fetal position. These weren't accidental, they were deliberate acts. What does this tell us? It tells us that our ancestors had crossed a monumental cognitive threshold. Think about what it takes to bury someone. It's not a simple or easy task, especially for a small group of hunter-gatherers struggling to survive. It requires immense effort. Digging a pit with primitive tools, moving the body, and covering it up. Why go to all that trouble? The answer likely lies in the dawn of complex emotions and symbolic thinking. For the first time, our ancestors weren't just reacting to a death. They were responding to it. They were feeling loss, grief. Seeing a member of their group, a parent, a child, or a friend, lying lifeless was no longer just a practical problem. It was an emotional crisis. The act of burial was a way to process this grief. It was a final act of care, a way to protect the body of a loved one from scavengers and the elements. It was a way of saying, you mattered. This is the beginning of what we might call human sentiment. Now, let's look closer at the evidence. In the Shenadar cave in Iraq, a famous Neanderthal burial known as Shenadar 4 was discovered. Analysis of the soil around the skeleton revealed clumps of ancient pollen. For decades, this was interpreted as evidence that this individual was buried on a bed of flowers, a flower burial. Imagine that. A Neanderthal, often depicted as a brutish caveman, carefully placing flowers on a deceased comrade. It was a poetic and powerful image of their humanity. While more recent research has questioned whether the pollen was brought in by burrowing rodents rather than by Neanderthals, the debate itself highlights the significance of these finds. Even without the flowers, the placement of the bodies in these caves suggests a level of care and ritual that was previously unimaginable. Another Neanderthal at Shenadar was found to have had multiple severe injuries during his life, including a crushed eye socket and a withered arm. He lived to be around 40 years old, an old man by prehistoric standards. He couldn't have survived alone. His community cared for him for years. His eventual burial wasn't just a disposal of a body. It was the final act of care for a cherished member of the group. This emotional awareness is tied to another crucial development: symbolic thinking. A grave is more than just a hole. It's a symbol. It marks a place. It transforms the physical landscape into a landscape of memory. By burying the dead, early humans were creating the first memorials. This spot is where we said goodbye to him. This rock is where she was laid to rest. This act anchors memory to a physical location, preventing the deceased from simply vanishing. This is a huge leap. It means our ancestors could think beyond the immediate present. They had a past they wanted to remember and, perhaps, a future they were beginning to imagine. Furthermore, burying someone makes their absence concrete. Before, a missing group member might have been lost on a hunt or wandered off. But a burial is a final, definitive statement. This person is gone. They are not coming back. This new, profound understanding of absence must have been terrifying. It forces a question: where did they go? Their physical body is here, but the person, the essence, the spirit, is gone. This question is the seed of all religion and spirituality. The fear of the unknown, the pain of loss, and the need for an explanation would have driven the human mind to create answers. Maybe they've gone on a journey to another world. Maybe they're watching over us from a sky world. Maybe they can still influence our lives. This is where we see the first inklings of belief in an afterlife. The items buried with the dead, known as grave goods, are our biggest clue. Why bury a person with tools, with animal bones, or with ornaments like shells? They certainly don't need them anymore in this world. The logical conclusion is that our ancestors believed they would need them in the next. These objects were provisions for a journey. The boar jawbone in kafse? Perhaps it was a favorite food or trophy from a great hunt, something to take with them. The red ochre, a natural pigment found in many ancient graves, is particularly fascinating. Skeletons were often covered in it, staining the bones red. Why? Red is the color of blood, the color of life. Perhaps covering the dead in red ochre was a symbolic act, an attempt to magically restore life to the body, or to give them vitality in the next world. It's a symbolic wish for continued existence. These practices weren't uniform everywhere, but the underlying themes are remarkably consistent. In Australia, the famous Mungo Man burial, dating back 40,000 years, shows the body was sprinkled with red ochre before being laid to rest. In Sanjar, Russia, around 30,000 years ago, we find one of the most elaborate Ice Age burials ever discovered. Two children were buried head to head, adorned with thousands of painstakingly carved mammoth ivory beads, spears, and daggers. The sheer amount of labor that went into creating these items is staggering. It's estimated that each bead took about an hour to make. This wasn't just a simple burial. It was a grand ceremony, suggesting these children held a very high status in their society. It speaks to a complex social structure and a deeply ingrained belief system about death and the afterlife. So when we ask why humans began to bury the dead, there's no single simple answer. It was a convergence of incredible new human abilities. It was the empathy to feel grief and the desire to care for our loved ones, even after death. It was the symbolic mind, able to turn a simple grave into a powerful memorial of memory and loss. It was the dawning of an abstract intellect, grappling with the terrifying finality of absence and asking the question, what comes next? And finally, it was the birth of belief itself, the creation of answers, of rituals, of an entire spiritual world to make sense of the ultimate mystery. The first grave was not just a hole in the ground. It was the foundation for all the art, religion, and philosophy that would follow. It was the moment we truly became human. Have you ever wondered what the earliest artists were thinking? I'm talking about our ancestors, tens of thousands of years ago, who ventured deep into the darkest, most treacherous caves on Earth. Inside, they created breathtaking masterpieces. But here is the puzzle that keeps archaeologists up at night. They painted these works in places that were almost impossible to reach, far from any living areas. Why create art with no audience? Let's journey back in time, deep underground. Imagine crawling through narrow, suffocating tunnels, climbing slippery rock faces, with only the flickering light of an animal fat lamp to guide you. This wasn't a casual stroll to a studio. This was a dangerous pilgrimage. In caves like Lascaux in France or Altamira in Spain, the most stunning paintings are found in the deepest, most remote chambers. These weren't murals for the living room. They were hidden away, as if their visibility was the last thing on the artists' minds. This immediately tells us that the art was about something more than just decoration. If you wanted to beautify your living space, you'd paint near the cave mouth where you actually lived, cooked, and slept. But these galleries are deep in the belly of the earth. So if not for decoration, what were they for? This is where things get really fascinating. Scholars believe these paintings were deeply symbolic. The animals depicted, bison, horses, mammoths, and lions, weren't just a menu of what was for dinner. In fact, analysis of animal bones found in the caves shows that the animals they ate were often different from the ones they painted. The painted animals were powerful, majestic, and often dangerous. They represented forces of nature, spirits, or perhaps clan totems. The placement of the art is also a huge clue. Sometimes images are painted over older ones, creating layers of history on a single rock wall. It seems the act of painting itself was more important than the final product. Perhaps each new layer was part of a recurring ritual, a way to connect with the spirits or powers represented by the animals. The very process of journeying into the earth and creating these images could have been a sacred act. One compelling theory suggests these deep, dark spaces were gateways to another world. The caves were seen as membranes between the world of the living and the spirit realm. The smooth, undulating cave walls might have been perceived as a veil. When a torch flickers across the contours of the rock, the painted animals seem to move, to breathe, to come alive. It's a natural prehistoric form of animation. Early humans may have believed that by painting these animals, they could interact with their spirits, gain power over them, or even travel to their world. Now let's consider the state of mind of the artists themselves. The journey into the cave was an experience of sensory deprivation. You leave the lights, sounds, and smells of the outside world behind. Deep inside, there's profound silence, total darkness, and a lack of oxygen. These conditions are known to induce altered states of consciousness, similar to trances or hallucinations. Some researchers, like David Lewis Williams, argue that shamanism is the key. A shaman, a spiritual guide for the community, would enter a trance-like state to journey into the spirit world. The geometric patterns often found alongside the animal paintings, the dots, lines, and zigzags, are remarkably similar to the entoptic phenomena people see in the early stages of a trance. The theory goes that the shaman would journey deep into the cave, which physically represented the journey into the subconscious. There, they would see the spirit animals on the cave walls and simply trace or elaborate on what was already there in their vision. The art wasn't just a depiction. It was a snapshot of a spiritual encounter. Think about it, the low oxygen levels, the disorientation, the flickering light making shadows dance. In this state, the shaman wouldn't just be painting a bison. They would be communing with the spirit of the bison. The act of painting would be a way to fix their vision, to bring back knowledge or power from the spirit world for the benefit of the tribe. This could be to ensure a successful hunt, to heal the sick, or to predict the future. But what if the answer is also rooted in something more fundamental to the human mind? Let's talk about the psychology of survival. Life in the Ice Age was brutal and uncertain. You were not at the top of the food chain. Every day was a struggle against nature, predators, and the elements. In such a world, how do you maintain hope? How do you build resilience? Art could have been a powerful psychological tool. By painting these formidable animals, our ancestors were perhaps trying to understand and gain a sense of control over their unpredictable world. It was a way of ordering their cosmos, of making sense of the powerful forces that govern their lives. Imagine being a hunter, about to face a herd of bison. Having participated in a ritual where you saw the spirit of the bison captured on a cave wall might give you a profound sense of confidence and mental fortitude. This wasn't magic in the sense of casting a spell. It was more like a powerful form of mental preparation. It was a way for the community to share knowledge, to reinforce social bonds, and to create a shared narrative about their world and their place in it. The stories told in these dark galleries would have been passed down through generations, forming the basis of their culture and collective memory. The art was a library, a school, and a temple, all rolled into one. Even the handprints found in so many caves speak to this. A hand placed on the wall and sprayed with pigment is a powerful statement. I was here. It's a mark of existence. A connection between an individual and a sacred place. A signature left across millennia. It's a profoundly human gesture, a way of asserting one's identity and presence in a vast and often overwhelming universe. So when we look at these ancient paintings, we're not just seeing pictures of animals. We are witnessing the birth of the human spirit's need to create, to understand, and to connect with something larger than itself. These dark caves were not empty galleries waiting for an audience. They were active, sacred spaces. They were wombs of creation, chambers of ritual, and portals to other dimensions. The artists who worked in these subterranean cathedrals weren't just decorating. They were explorers of the mind, pioneers of spirituality, and architects of culture. They were weaving the very fabric of what it means to be human. They painted in the dark, not because they didn't want to be seen, but because in the darkness, they could see everything. The art didn't need an audience of people, because it was made for an audience of spirits, of ancestors, and of the cosmos itself. And perhaps, in a way, we are the audience they never anticipated. By studying their work, we are continuing the conversation they started 40,000 years ago, trying to answer the eternal questions of who we are and why we are here. Their art, hidden in the dark for so long, continues to enlighten us today. Have you ever wondered how our ancestors survived for hundreds of thousands of years without a single farm? We often think of agriculture as the dawn of civilization, the moment humanity truly began to thrive. But what if I told you that for the vast majority of human history, we lived as hunter-gatherers, and not only did we survive, we flourished? How did they pull it off? How did these ancient societies avoid the kind of collapse we see in later, more complex civilizations? The answer is a masterclass in resilience, adaptation, and a deep, intuitive understanding of the world. Let's journey back in time, long before the first seed was planted. Imagine a world teeming with life, a world without cities, roads, or supermarkets. This was the world of the hunter-gatherer. For over 95% of our time on this planet, this was how everyone lived. The common picture is one of a brutal, constant struggle for survival. But the archaeological and anthropological evidence paints a far more nuanced and fascinating picture. They weren't just surviving, they were living rich, complex lives. So, what was their secret? The first key ingredient was mobility. Unlike settled agricultural societies that were tied to their land, hunter-gatherers were nomads. They didn't stay in one place until the resources were gone. Instead, they moved with the seasons, following the herds of animals, and tracking the cycles of plant life. Think of it as a grand continental dance. When one area's resources started to dwindle, they simply packed up and moved to another, allowing the first area to recover. This constant movement prevented them from overexploiting any single ecosystem. They weren't just wandering aimlessly. They had an encyclopedic knowledge of their territory, knowing exactly when and where to find food, water, and shelter. This prevented the famines that often plagued early farming communities when a single crop failed. Their food source wasn't one field of wheat. It was the entire landscape. But mobility alone wasn't enough. The second, and perhaps most crucial, element was profound cooperation. In a world without writing, police forces, or formal governments, how did they maintain order? The answer lies in the small scale of their groups. Most hunter-gatherer bands were made up of a few dozen individuals, mostly extended family. In a group that's small, everyone knows everyone else. Your reputation is everything. This creates a powerful system of social accountability. They developed intricate systems of sharing, especially for large game. When a hunter brought back a big kill, it wasn't just for his family. The meat was distributed throughout the entire band according to specific social rules. This wasn't just generosity. It was a brilliant insurance policy. You might be the successful hunter today, but next week you might come back empty-handed. By sharing your surplus, you ensure that when you're in need, others will share with you. This ethos of reciprocity and mutual obligation was the glue that held their societies together. It minimized conflict and ensured that the entire group, not just the strongest individuals, had a chance to thrive. This strong sense of community was their social safety net. Let's talk about their relationship with nature. We tend to see the environment as a resource to be managed and controlled. For hunter-gatherers, the relationship was much more intimate and reciprocal. They saw themselves not as masters of nature, but as part of it. They possessed an incredible depth of ecological knowledge, passed down through generations via stories, songs, and direct teaching. They knew which plants were edible, which were medicinal, and which were poisonous. They understood the behavior of animals in minute detail. This wasn't just practical knowledge. It was often woven into their spiritual beliefs. Many hunter-gatherer cultures held a deep reverence for the natural world, viewing animals, plants, and even landscapes as powerful, sentient beings. This worldview fostered a sense of respect and stewardship, encouraging them to take only what they needed and to maintain the balance of their environment. They understood on a fundamental level that their own survival was directly linked to the health of the ecosystem they inhabited. This is a powerful lesson in sustainability that we are only now beginning to relearn. Now imagine living in a world full of dangers, predators, accidents, sudden changes in weather. How did they cope psychologically? This brings us to their incredible mental and emotional resilience. Life was undoubtedly tough, and they faced constant uncertainty. But their social structure provided a powerful buffer against stress. Being part of a tight-knit, supportive community meant you were never truly alone. The collective nature of their lives, from child-rearing to food gathering, distributed the burdens and the joys. Furthermore, their worldview was not one of constant anxiety about the future. They lived very much in the present. Without the need to store massive surpluses or plan for harvests years in advance, their focus was on the here and now. This isn't to say they didn't plan, but their planning was fluid and adaptable, focused on the immediate cycles of nature rather than long-term, rigid schedules. This present-focused mindset, combined with a deep trust in their skills and their community, likely contributed to a lower level of the chronic stress that plagues our modern lives. They also had rituals, art, and music, which provided meaning, connection, and a way to process the challenges and mysteries of life. The famous cave paintings at Lascaux or Chauvet are not just pretty pictures. They are a window into the rich symbolic and spiritual world of our ancestors, a testament to their capacity for creativity and abstract thought, even in the harshest of conditions. So, why did this incredibly successful way of life eventually fade? The transition to agriculture wasn't a sudden event, but a slow, complex process that happened independently in different parts of the world. As the last ice age ended, the climate stabilized, and in some fertile regions, resources became so abundant that people could settle down. Population growth may have put pressure on the nomadic lifestyle, making farming a more viable option to feed more mouths in a smaller area. Agriculture offered the promise of a storable surplus, which allowed for larger populations, specialized labor, and eventually the rise of cities and states. But this came at a cost. Early farmers often had a less diverse diet than hunter-gatherers, leading to nutritional deficiencies. They were more vulnerable to famine if their crops failed. Living in crowded permanent settlements led to the rapid spread of diseases. And the concept of surplus and private property created social hierarchies and inequalities that were largely absent in hunter-gatherer societies. In many ways, the shift to agriculture traded the resilience and egalitarianism of the hunter-gatherer world for the stability and the problems of civilization. So the story of our prehistoric ancestors is not one of primitive struggle, but of a remarkably successful and sustainable way of life that lasted for millennia. They avoided collapse not through technology or conquest, but through mobility, deep cooperation, ecological wisdom, and psychological resilience. They remind us that there are many ways to be human, and that some of the most important lessons for our own future might be found in our most distant past. Their ability to live in balance with their environment and with each other is a powerful legacy. As we face our own unique set of global challenges, perhaps it's time to look back at the original human success story and ask what we can learn. Have you ever wondered what the greatest mystery of human history is? It's not about pyramids or aliens. It's something much more fundamental, something we live with every single day. It's the question of why we ever changed at all. For nearly 2 million years, our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers. Think about their lifestyle. They worked maybe 15 to 20 hours a week. Their diet was incredibly varied and nutritious, far more so than the average person's today. They spent their days with family and friends, had plenty of leisure time, and were masters of their environment. Evidence suggests they were taller, healthier, and suffered from fewer chronic diseases than the first farmers who came after them. By all accounts, it was a pretty good life. So why on earth would anyone give that up? This is the central puzzle. Around 12,000 years ago, a dramatic shift began. Humans started settling down. They started cultivating a few specific crops, like wheat and rice. They went from roaming free to being tied to a single plot of land. This is the agricultural revolution, and it changed everything. But was it for the better? Let's look at the trade-offs. What did we lose? We lost our leisure time. Farming is backbreaking, relentless work. From sunrise to sunset, it's a cycle of planting, watering, weeding, and harvesting. We lost our varied diet. Suddenly, we were dependent on a handful of starchy crops. If a drought or a pest destroyed that single crop, you faced starvation. This dependence led to nutritional deficiencies, cavities from high-carbohydrate diets, and new infectious diseases that spread like wildfire in crowded settlements. Our social structures changed too. In hunter-gatherer societies, resources were generally shared. There was a strong sense of community and egalitarianism. But once you have land and stored food, you have something to protect. This gave rise to social hierarchies, inequality, and organized warfare on a scale never seen before. We invented property, which led to the concepts of mine and yours, creating conflict and social stratification. We lost a certain kind of freedom, the freedom to just walk away if you didn't like your situation. So, what did we gain? Well, the most obvious gain is the ability to support much larger populations. Agriculture allowed for a food surplus, which meant not everyone had to be a farmer. This surplus fed the rise of specialists, artisans, priests, soldiers, and eventually, scientists and engineers. It paved the way for the development of villages, which grew into cities, which grew into empires. It allowed for the creation of writing, mathematics, art, and all the complex technologies that define our modern world. Without agriculture, there would be no smartphones, no skyscrapers, no internet. We gained civilization itself. But this brings us to a deeper, more philosophical question. Was this progress worth the psychological cost? Think about it. The hunter-gatherer lived in the present. Their world was immediate and tangible. They weren't worrying about next year's harvest or the fluctuating price of grain. The farmer, on the other hand, became a master of anxiety. Their entire existence was built on worrying about the future, the weather, the pests, the raids from neighboring tribes. This shift planted the seeds of a future-oriented anxiety that still haunts us today. We are constantly striving, planning, worrying about what's next, rarely content with the present moment. Did we trade happiness for progress? This is the great paradox. We built a world of incredible complexity and technological marvel, but it came at the cost of our health, our leisure, and perhaps even our peace of mind. We engineered a system that could feed billions, but also created famine and inequality. We built cities that are centers of culture and innovation, but also breeding grounds for disease and loneliness. And that brings us back to the ultimate question. Why? Why did we do it? There are many theories. Some say climate change at the end of the last ice age forced our hands, making old hunting grounds less reliable. Others suggest it was a slow, almost accidental process. A little gardening here, a small settlement there, until we were too far down the path to turn back. Some even propose it was driven by a desire for status or religious rituals that required a fixed location and a surplus of resources. But none of these theories fully explain why humans, all across the globe, independently chose a harder, less healthy life. It wasn't a single decision made by a single group. It was a trend that swept the planet. It seems almost like a biological imperative, a deep-seated drive within our species to grow, to expand, to build, even at our own expense. Perhaps the greatest mystery of prehistory isn't about how we built the pyramids, but why we built them in the first place. Why did we trade the freedom of the savannah for the shackles of civilization? We are the heirs of that decision, living in the world it created, full of its wonders and its anxieties. And the truth is, we still don't have a definitive answer. The question of why we chose this path echoes through the millennia, reminding us that the story of humanity is not just a story of progress, but also a story of profound and mysterious choices. What do you think? Was it a mistake, or our greatest achievement? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy exploring these big questions, make sure to subscribe for more.